And share my screen. Can you guys see my screen? I just want to make sure.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, good. Okay, thank you very much. All right, well, welcome to the April 15th Supervising SLP meeting. I was just talking to several of you who are on spring break and still coming to this meeting, so thank you very much. It shows your dedication. So today, what I hope that we're going to be able to do is just briefly go over the things that were presented at the last meeting. Just as a reminder, so you know everything is due June 1st. Don't forget to have your SLPAs turn them in, and you or the SLPA upload it to the shared folder, and then you need to talk to the county about what policies they have as far as maintaining documentation. Verification report has your caseload and your percentage of direct and indirect, which you've been keeping track of, so that should be easy. And somewhere you have your supervision logs, and you indicate whether some of you still had a lot of telepractice sessions, so just verifying that you saw 100% hopefully of their first telepractice session. Please have your SLPAs upload. There's no place on the website, on the team site, for them to put their certificates, but there is a folder within our shared folder for them to put all their certificates. Some have started to do that, but it will save them and you and me and Leanne a lot of difficulty if they go ahead and do it and have that done. Just a reminder, any attendance at a state or national conference will count. Anything that we've presented that's approved by the WVDE office will count. And if your county has continuing education that has been approved through the state, that would be fine. So just make sure that they get their certificates of attendance. What's not counted is if they do a practicum, or if they are taking classes for a pay upgrade or a certificate renewal. Now, the reason that we separated WVU from you guys is that the WVU students are able to take one of their classes as a credit because they are working full-time and going to school full-time, but that's the only instance of where a class would be approved. Don't remind them to upload their certificates. Now, the final DUSA, you can choose whether you want to have just the last 9 weeks if you've included all the others, or you can put everything on one form. It really doesn't matter. It's whatever works for you. Some of you guys have a lot of notes on your DUSAs, which is great. It shows that you're really trying to provide that information. So it might be cleaner if you put them all on one form, but remember to put the date of the direct observation and the date of the review of the progress report. And then the SLPA would turn it in, and also you would save it in the shared folder. The SLPA authorization is renewed every year. Some SLPAs didn't know that a couple years ago, and it's renewed every year. It's valid for 1 school year. It expires on June 30th, and so they must reapply. They have to have 12 hours of the verified professional development. That's why the verification report has that, and their certificates. And then your percent of direct and indirect supervision should be documented on that verification report. But I know they want to get it done. I understand the end of the school year, you just want to put everything that needs to be done, get it done when you can, but have them wait until like mid-May or something to actually do the renewal and all that kind of thing, because it just gets kind of crazy for the certification department. They go to the WVDE certification site. They use Form 38, and then that's also available in the guidance document for you to see what has to be filled out, but it does need to be filled out on the site. And so now, do you all have any questions about the documentation? I know it's like I've gone over this over and over again. All right, so I'm going to start with a disclaimer. We're going to talk about ASHA's new guidance or scope of practice for SLPAs. But I want to make it clear, this may or may not change anything that we're doing. So, and if it does change, it would take place this summer, and it may not change at all because ASHA defers to the states as far as what they are recommending, and we got the recommendations from ASHA the last time, so we feel like what we have in our guidance document is still relevant. But I want your input, and this is where I would like for you guys to take some notes and provide some input. There's a greater emphasis on ethics. It defers to the state guidelines, and it really emphasizes the collaboration and the communication between the SLP and the SLPA. Okay, let's start with the first thing that I'm a little bit concerned about. How do you determine appropriate supervision? So they refer to it in red, this is all quotes from them: appropriate and adequate direct and indirect supervision. And it varies, and we understand this, upon the case's complexity and the SLPA's experience. We've had those issues. We have some SLPAs who've been working forever in the same school, and it makes sense that they maybe would not be supervised as much. But the issue, what would increase with you guys as supervisors would be you would need to have assessments of their skills. You would need to use those forms that are in the guidance document to provide feedback to the SLPA about their skills, and also to document or validate that you've looked at them and you feel comfortable with what they're doing. Here's another thing in the ASHA document. It says the SLPA is responsible for communicating their knowledge, experience, and self-assessment. We do have a self-assessment in the guidance document for them to use. And then they also need to provide feedback regarding what they need from you. That's going to come up in just a second. But you, as the supervisor, should provide feedback regarding their performance, and the evaluation forms would validate their competence, which puts a lot, I think, on you guys. I'm glad that they're recognizing state licensed SLPs, and back to this competencies and caseload, both of which are determined by the supervising SLP. So what kind of concerns me about that is there's a lot of wiggle room there, and it could put you in an awkward position, particularly with your administrators. And so that's what I want your feedback about. Would you rather have specific percentages listed so that you have something to fall back on, or do you feel comfortable with evaluating the SLPA's competencies within the school that they're working in at the time, and determining the amount of supervision, and in essence answering, like, well, I need to supervise this SLPA more compared to the one last year, or they're in a new school, so I have to supervise them more. How would that work as far as the flexibility of schedules? Those schedules are a big thing, and could it change? I mean, because the SLPA's school, their caseload may change, and that would require a different kind of evaluation and determination of direct supervision. So, I mean, ASHA's coming out with their own evaluation form, and we will certainly look at that. But we already in our guidance document have the 3 evaluations. We have the self-evaluation by the SLPA. We have this is probably the most important one, and that's the level of supervision and instruction. So you would rate them at, from being like needing all kinds of supervision to being independent. And of course, if you were to say, well, they don't need but maybe an hour of direct supervision or whatever, You would have to show that they're pretty independent in those areas. And that would help you also determine which areas you might need to be more involved in, and what the times you need to schedule to supervise them. Like, let's say if it's a student with autism, you might need to be more involved with them than let's say kids or students with speech sound disorders. Then the feedback to you. I think this is important too, because we assume things are all right, and I've discovered in doing these SLPA meetings that sometimes they don't feel as comfortable telling you what they need support in. And so this gives them an opportunity to tell you how they best receive feedback and the kind of feedback or the areas of feedback that they need. So I don't think many of you all have used these evaluation forms, but I think they would become critical if we would make any changes in the guidance document. So what is adequate supervision? How do you determine this? Now, we did make some changes this past year for SLPAs who've been, working forever and they're in the same school. We can drop it down a little bit. But I don't know of any other way to determine that if we follow ASHA's new guidelines, except to do evaluations. And I don't know how comfortable you guys feel with that or feel about that. So that's where I need your input. I mean, we're looking at their knowledge and their skills and their caseload and your responsibility. Remember, you're still responsible for that caseload. So, how comfortable do you feel giving them more? And then there's pressures. The reality is the special ed directors, which I would never want to be a special ed director, has to make sure that all the students in their county receive the services that are on the IEPs. So they're going to be, I think, possibly pressuring you to take on more of your kids on your caseload and provide less instruction, observation, and of direct and indirect observations on your schedule. And I don't know about that. So that's why I want your feedback. This is your chance to provide the feedback as we begin to look at these new guidance or a scope of practice, which some people have referred to as very wishy-washy because it's just not clear. And we're kind of disappointed that they're providing less, but I think they're realizing that there's such a difference across the country in how SLPAs are supervised and how they're used. And so I really want your feedback. So, please, let me know. And there's a point there where you can either say you like certain things about this or you don't like certain things about it. Now, this is another thing that I think will impact scheduling. And that is, they're saying that depending upon the amount of services that a student receives, the SLP should at least see these students every 30 to 60 days, depending upon the frequency of sessions and the setting. So how would you determine that? And what they really think is important, and I agree, is that you have, at a minimum, retain direct contact with the students and their families. So can you do that? We've been doing it every 9 weeks. If we change the guidance as far as the amount of weekly direct, indirect supervision, we may have to change the DUSA to where you're seeing the students at least every month. So I'm thinking that, let's say you don't supervise everybody every week, but you make sure that you see every student every 30 days. What do you think about that? So your schedule would be different. It wouldn't be like you'd have a full day or a half day to supervise the SLPA, but it might be, see, this is a scheduling issue. So this is where I want your feedback. Do you like it the way it is, the every 9 weeks? Or if we changed and you didn't have to supervise the SLPA every week, would you agree to at least seeing the students every 30 days? This makes sense. I mean, when you think, I mean, the poor SLPAs, you know, CODAs and PTAs have been recognized for years, and you know, we're a little behind as speech pathologists and a little more restrictive. So we want to move them to this direction, to where they're more independent and they do more, but we also have to maintain the ethical responsibility of the caseload. So thoughts about having a DUSA form that's every month, but then you wouldn't necessarily do the direct indirect every week? I don't know. I mean, I'm just getting your feedback. So the other suggestion that one of you has recommended was, as opposed to weekly indirect supervision, that it would be an average of monthly. And that makes sense because some months you're doing IEPs, but it's not every week that you need to see them that much. And so what would you think about at least the indirect supervision being averaged every month as opposed to every week? So if you did 10% over a month and you just did the average and you put them all together, that might make your life a little easier. What I'm trying to do is make it so that you can maintain the quality of the services provided and the feedback you give to the SLPA, but make it a little less work and crazy for you. Here's something else that ASHA talked about, and that's, I think some of you probably already have them do their screenings, and you're also having them assist with assessments. But what do you think this means? I mean, I'm like, well, okay, administering and scoring assessment tools that we know the examiner requirements. So many of the tests will not allow an SLPA because it refers specifically to an SLP. But if there are tools, assessment tools that they are allowed to provide, and you verify that they're competent in it, what would you think about them doing some of that? Again, it's so much dependent upon the competency of the SLPA. So I don't know about that. I just don't know. There's a question there. You know, that would make your life a lot easier, but I don't know what you think about it. And then this was interesting, which makes it's not clear. Providing input in what in our instance would be an interdisciplinary team meeting without the presence or prior approval of the supervising SLP. So we already know that they need to be doing their IEPs, right? I mean, you need to be doing their IEPs, but what does it mean if you would give them approval to provide the IEPs, to do the IEP meetings? A lot of you are already having them write the IEPs and then you approve it or look it over and then you do the IEP meeting. What does that mean to you? Does that mean that possibly they could do the IEP meetings, and would you feel comfortable with that? Again, this is kind of vague and I'm not sure. So I'd like your feedback on what you think that means. And they're going back to allowing 3 SLPAs for every SLP. They last time said 2, and we were moving in that direction, but now they're saying 3. You could supervise 3. So we just, you know, would not move to the 2. And as I've said, the issue is balancing all of this. I've been talking to some of you who say, you know, it's really beneficial to collaborate with an SLPA. I'm learning from them and we can get ideas from each other. And there's a lot of good benefits. But what I'm also hearing from people either who are doing the supervision this time or people who won't even consider it is the fact that they're thinking it's just a lot of extra work. And so it's a balancing act here as far as making it so that you maintain that collaboration and get the benefits. But, you know, if we can cut back on the work that you have to provide and still be ethical and balanced, then, you know, this is your chance to provide feedback on any of these things that ASHA has vaguely presented. So I think I've heard the biggest challenges to supervising an SLPA is the amount of time for direct and indirect supervision, the IEPs, because you have your IEPs and their IEPs, trying to schedule this so that you can see all the students on their caseload and provide the supervision that you need, and there's extra paperwork. So other things that you're seeing, you know, provide that feedback. What are your challenges? What would you like to have changed? Like I said, I can't promise there'll be any changes, but this is your chance. Because when we do a lot of the scope of practice changes, we do it in the summer because that's a little less crazy. So this would be, please spend some time on this and make sure that you you know, really provide some feedback that will be helpful. So I'm going to put the verification in the chat box in a minute, and the link, and you would have until Monday to fill it out. I know most of you will be thinking, I want to get it done today, but please spend some time on it because your feedback is really valuable. Make sure that you spend time also. A lot of people get in a hurry, especially with their email addresses, and they might leave an extra space or a comma. And then that makes it really difficult to do a mail merge. So, you know, please spend some time on that. And there are some questions about the ASHA CEUs. You will get ASHA CEUs for attending these supervisor meetings this spring. And so there's a question about, have you already filled out your ASHA information for this series, not for another series like a preschool team or something like that? Then you don't, if you've done it for this series, then you only have to do it once. And there's a place for you to provide suggestions for future training or improving the training. And for the people who will be viewing this as a recording, remember the links in the chat box are for live presentations, and the QR codes in the slides are for recordings. And here is the QR code for the recording, and it's anybody can look at it and get credit as long as they turn everything in by May 2nd. So now I am going to stop the recording. We have maybe two, and I'm going to put the information in the chat box. And I would like to hear, let me put the information in the chat box, and then I'm going to stop the recording. And does anybody have anything you want to say before we end? Stopping the recording now, so you won't be recorded.